Hey everyone, it's Mostly Casual Commander, where we try to keep our games fun without sacrificing our wins. I'm BK, and today's game features 4 new commanders from Commander Legends Battle for Baldur's Gate, and they are Elminster, Miirym, Sentinel Worm, Wilson, Refined Grizzly, and Ganax, Astral Hunter. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and check out our Patreon, link in the description. Here goes Busterkins leading us off again by playing an island as his land for turn and casting Wayfarer's Bauble, allowing him to fetch up another land card later on. Over to new to the channel Hunter, who plays Glasspool Shore and passes over to Azrael. He plays a Plains as his land, then passes over to also new to the channel Chris, who plays a Forest as his land and plays Birds of Paradise as a follow-up. Over to Busterkins, kicking off turn 2, he plays Temple of Enlightenment, getting a Scry and putting that right to the bottom. He says go to Hunter, who plays a Forest as his land, and then he casts Fauna Shaman, allowing him to start fetching up creature cards later on. Over to Azrael's turn, he plays a Forest as his land, and then he casts Noble Heritage from the command zone, allowing him to start getting +1/+1 counters on his commander, as well as gaining protection from his opponents. A Forest hits Chris's battlefield, and he casts his background, which is Acolyte of Bahamut, allowing him to reduce the cost of some of his dragons in the future. Glacial Fortress hits the table for Busterkins, followed by Fairy Seer. And with that, he'll get to scry 2 cards, which is exactly what his commander wants him to be doing. Maybe in later turns he'll get to do scrying with his commander out in the battlefield. He goes and finds a Plains with his Wayfarer's Bubble and says go over to Hunter. He drops Hinterland Harbor as his land for turn, and then he moves to combat, dealing 2 points of damage to Azrael. He follows that up by casting Cultivate. He'll grab 2 mountains, one to his hand and one tapped onto his battlefield. Over to Azrael's turn, he plays Overgrown Farmland. Following that, he'll cast his commander Wilson, Refined Grizzly, very distinguished gentleman, triggering his Noble Heritage.
Everyone can put 2 +1/+1 counters on one of the creatures. If you do, I gain protection from you until my next turn.
So 2 counters are put on Wilson, and 2 counters are put on Busterkins' Fairy Seer. Gruul Gilgate hits the board for Chris, and then he casts Steely Resolve, naming Dragon, meaning that all of the dragons on the table now have Shroud, which I'm sure Hunter loves. Island hits Busterkins' table, then he casts his commander, Elminster. Evidently he's like the greatest wizard in all the land or something, so he'll allow some reduced costs based off of scrying. He'll get card draw and more scrying action, as well as being able to produce some fairy dragon tokens. Hunter drops a mountain, and then he casts Sylvan Library, allowing him to gain more card draw at the expense of life. Then Kodama's Reach is cast, so he'll go to his library and fetch up a forest as well as an island. And with that, he'll say go. Over to Azrael, has an upkeep trigger, getting 2 more counters on Wilson. Nobody else takes him up on that offer. He drops Forest as his land for turn, and then casts 3 visits. So he'll go get another Forest card, and it'll enter the battlefield. Just like that. See? He did it. Good job, buddy. Then he casts Black Blade Reforged, which will certainly do a good job of pumping the creature it is equipped to. Then he moves to combat with his commander at Busterkins, who decides to chump block with his Fairy Seer, still taking a few points of damage over the top because of Wilson's endless keywords. Forest hits Chris's battlefield on his turn, then he casts his commander, Ganax, Astral Hunter. When it enters the battlefield, he'll grab another treasure, then he'll pass the turn over to Busterkins. He activates Elminster's second ability and exiles Approach of the Second Sun off the top of his library, so he'll gain 7 fairy dragon creature tokens with flying, and evidently Shroud, thanks to Chris. Then he casts Talran, Sky Summoner, in an effort to start producing some 2/2 flying drakes. Over to Hunter's turn, Sylvan Library will allow him to draw 3 cards. He'll put 1 card back on top of his library at the expense of 4 life. Then he plays an island and moves right into combat at Elminster with his Fauna Shaman, trying to deal 2 points of damage. In response, Busterkins casts Opt, gaining a 2/2 Drake, as well as looking at some cards and drawing a card from his library. He then blocks with his Drake, killing itself and the Fauna Shaman to death. Hunter follows that up by casting Blasphemous Act. I see what you did there, bud. So he kills all the creatures on the battlefield, and then he casts his commander, Miirym, Sentinel Worm. Pretty sure I'm pronouncing that right, but if somebody else knows a better way to pronounce it, try to do that thing where you tell us in the comments with like making the word with like dashes and capitalizations and all that kind of stuff. Azrael casts his commander, Wilson, Refined Grizzly, again. This triggers his Noble Heritage, getting him a couple counters. Then Chris casts Atsushi, the Blazing Sun. and hopefully that will die and give him some stuff. Felwar Stone hits Busterkins' battlefield, and then he activates Elminster, drawing a card, and then scrying 2 more cards. In this case, he puts 1 to the top and 1 to the bottom. He drops an island as his land for turn, and then he casts Prognostic Sphinx, allowing him to start scrying some more whenever it attacks. Over to Hunter. Again, Sylvan Library replaces how he draws cards. In this case, he puts 2 back to the top, taking no life. He casts Terror of the Peaks, which, thanks to Miirym, gives him a copy of Terror of the Peaks, which that copy then sees the original Terror of the Peaks, and he slings some points of damage over at Elminster, dropping him to 1 loyalty counter. Then combat.
Catch these hands.
Yes, Azrael, please catch those hands. And he does. He goes down to 32. On Azrael's upkeep, Wilson gets 2 more counters, Atsushi does as well, and the Prognostic Sphinx, so Azrael has a little bit of protection before casting Utopia Sprawl, naming white. Then he equips Blackblade Reforged to Wilson, making him a disgustingly large gentleman caller at Chris's door, and Chris decides to block with Atsushi, still taking a bunch of damage over the top, but he gains 3 treasures thanks to Atsushi dying. On to Chris's turn, he draws, he plays a mountain as his land. He then taps out and uses some of those treasures to recast his commander, Ganax, Astral Hunter, and again, whenever it entered the battlefield, he gains another treasure token as well. He passes the turn over to Busterkins. He draws and goes right into activating Elminster, drawing another card, and scrying 2 more cards down to the bottom of his library. He casts Jace's Sanctum, reducing the cost of his instants and spells, as well as getting him some more scry action. Onto combat with his Prognostic Sphinx. He gets to scry a little bit more, and targets Chris for some more damage, being the only real target that he had at that time. Onto Hunter, again replaced his card draw with Sylvan Library, taking 0 this time. Wild Growth is cast on one of his forests, then he casts his own Atsushi, the Blazing Sky.
Ooh! I can murder another one of those?
Yeah, you could try, Azrael, I guess, with your bear with the sword. Azrael takes some more damage off of Terror of the Peaks triggering. A second copy of Atsushi is made thanks to Miirym, which again triggers Terror of the Peaks and deals more damage to Azrael. Then Hunter moves to combat, swinging at Chris, Elminster, and Busterkins, killing Elminster, and with no blocks declared, those 2 players go to 24 and 31. And over to Azrael's turn, Noble Heritage triggers on his upkeep, Busterkins says okay, and he grabs 2 more counters on his Sphinx. Then Azrael casts Esper Sentinel, hoping to draw some cards off of his opponents. Then he casts Orzhov Advocist, which for the most part says the same thing as Noble Heritage. Then he thinks about combat.
What are your intentions?
Thank you for 14.
I will cast Submerge, targeting.
Okay, you gotta pay 2?
I will pay 2.
But in response, Azrael casts a beautiful snakeskin veil in that awesome Japanese art. And with that on the stack, though, Busterkins decides to say no with Arcane Denial. And this triggers a fist bump from Hunter, and also Esper Sentinel and Jace's Sanctum. Arcane Denial will resolve, putting Snakeskin Veil into the bin. Submerge resolves, putting Wilson on top of Azrael's library. At least he gets to draw it right back during Chris's upkeep. And onto Chris's turn, he casts Dragon Lord Atarka. This will trigger Ganax, getting Chris another treasure, and then Atarka's ETB happens.
I'm gonna do... Yes, that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm doing 4
Okay, it's not personal. It doesn't kill this. These are not legal targets.
I was gonna say, I can't target dragons.
And poor Azrael gets picked on a little bit, but honestly, it does make the most sense. There wasn't much else that Chris could have done with that. Onto combat, he deals some damage to Azrael too.
That will be my turn. I did a thing and I'm proud, I'm done, I'm good.
And over to Busterkins, he draws for turn, and then he taps out in order to recast his commander, and then he activates its +2 ability, drawing a card, and then scrying 2 more cards. He keeps them right on top, and after that he moves to end step, whereby he has to discard a card. Onto Hunter, he draws 3 with Sylvan Library, puts 1 back on top, and takes 4.
I crave violence, so beg.
Oh my god.
Please?
Hunter moves into combat, feeling a non-zero amount of pity on poor Azrael and drops him to 1, but decides to leave him in the game. Then he casts Realm Walker, which is of course a dragon, so this triggers Miirym, as well as Terror of the Peaks. He then casts Thrakis the Butcher, again triggering his commander Miirym, as well as Terror of the Peaks.
I missed a trigger on those ones, but I will not miss this trigger.
Well, mistakes happen, buddy. No big deal. So these Terror of the Peaks triggers hit Elminster, as well as Chris and Busterkins. And then over to Azrael's turn, he recasts his commander Wilson, again triggering Noble Heritage. And in this case, Busterkins also gets 2 +1/+1 counters. Azrael equips Blackblade Reforged, and then casts Hardy Outlander, a new card that can pump one of your creatures if you attack the person with the highest life. Over to Chris, he plays another Atarka. In this case, it's Atarka World Render, and this will give him another treasure. He will then use some of his treasure to cast Sarkhan's Triumph. So he'll go and find a dragon card, revealing it, and then putting it into his hand. He finds Goldspan Dragon, one of my personal favorites, really good in Prosper Tomebound, and in most decks all the time because it's great. Chris moves to combat, and it looks like nobody caught the fact that his Atarka World Render had Summoning Sickness. Mistakes happen, everything's fine, it didn't impact the outcome of the game. But he did deal some damage in combat and shipped the turn to Busterkins. He activated Elminster and drew a card and scryed 2 cards to the bottom. He plays a Plains as his land, casts Rhystic Study in an effort to draw yet more cards. What are you trying to do, man? Then he casts Smothering Tithe, another channel favorite, gaining you all the treasures. Over to Hunter's turn, he says no thank you to Sylvan Library for that turn, and with the writing on the wall, he moves right into combat at all 3 of his opponents. So I guess making a bunch of copies of your dragons is really good. Congratulations, Hunter. So what did you all think of these new commanders from Commander Legends Battle for Baldur's Gate? We hope you enjoyed the game. We'll be showcasing more commanders from the new set in the near future, so make sure you check that out. Let us know what you thought of this game in the comments, and as always, thank you for watching.